Okay, so let's start. I would like to welcome you at this in this panel, which is focusing on interventions aimed at or targeting housing of Roma, in particular in informal, meaning many times segregated settlements, which are the reality in many countries, in particular in Central Europe, like Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, but also it's an issue in countries like Greece or Cyprus. On the other hand, in many other Central European or Western European countries, those segregated mainly rural Roma settlements are not the reality, but there are other issues related to bad housing conditions and segregation. Um, and the speakers in this panel are experts in this field, specifically from the Central European region. So I would like to welcome Esther Somogyi from Metropolitan Research Institute in Budapest, uh, Bojan Zahariev from Open Society Institute in Sofia, and Bogdan Suditu from the Department of Social Geography at Budapest University. And myself, I'm Marek Hojsik. I'm originally coming from Slovakia, where I was working for the government in the field of Roma housing and social housing. And recently, and currently, I'm living in Czechia, and I work for the Central European University in Budapest. So I'm very Central European person. Uh, and the topic of this panel is exactly dilemmas and puzzles concerning policy solutions to the challenges related to housing of Roma. And my experience from policymaking practice and also research I have been engaged in was that measures and policy reaction to the issues is very often facing a dilemma or decision between making suboptimal interventions, which are very often investments into material condition of Roma in segregated settlements or neighborhoods, or trying to do something considered more optimal, which would include also the segregation aspects. But this option is unfortunately often considered as very difficult politically or even impossible because the first choice or first idea how to address this issue would be the relocation of people from segregated housing into desegregated, into mixed housing. What is unfortunately seen as very problematic for diverse reasons, uh, very often political reasons, that it would create very strong negative reaction from local inhabitants, but also other practical puzzles we can discuss. On the other hand, my opinion is that to achieve real social inclusion, investments only into improvement of material housing conditions is not enough if the segregation problem is not resolved. And why I believe in this that this is problematic is that if people remain segregated, they will hardly have improved access to the labor market, uh, into meaningful interactions with the mainstream society, which can, I think, help to build the social capital, which would be bridging, that would help uh, overcome the gap between the Roma and non-Roma population, uh, and also to social services, because it's there is a lot of evidence that if we have segregated public services, in particular education, etc., they have significantly lower quality than the mainstream uh, public services which are used by the mainstream population. On the other hand, having such, let's put it like, high ideals or high expectations from housing interventions, and saying we do not do anything unless the segregation is tackled, can can lead to total blockage. So nothing is going to be done because on the local level, often this is a barrier. It's hard to overcome. So I would like to ask my colleagues what they think about this dilemma, what they think about the imperative of desegregation, and how those dilemmas and puzzles can be resolved in practice.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe Esther, you have done a lot of researches on the local level about the housing intervention. So what do you think about this?
Okay, thank you, Marek. Yes, I think that yes, this segregation is a very complex issue, and as you could see, although there are some few good examples, there are not really many many interventions, despite that sufficient EU funds are available for this purpose. And we know that the Commission is really support the desegregation approach by investing into Roma communities. I think it's very difficult to say when the eradication of a settlement should be implemented entirely and when only partly, because it's very much depends on the size of the settlement, the location, and the type. Let's say when you have a settlement with a few hundred people, it's much easier to implement a desegregation program when you have a settlement with several thousand or 10,000 people. But I think that desegregation should be part all of the integration program that targets Roma settlements. And that is a very important issue because the desegregation is about, as we see, and I just like to talk about this one, is about opening up choices, that you provide choices for the people who are live segregated, because segregation means no choice usually, and segregation means the exclusion that people are cut off from resources in the field of housing, education, employment, etc., as you already told us. While desegregation means the opposite, that you provide people access to real and better and safe and long-term opportunities, really. And I would stress this one. And you have to form policies that these safe and long-term opportunities becomes a reality for the people. And I would also argue against such approaches that Roma settlements are some like traditional Roma communities, or communities that people live in by their free choice, so deliberately, because we could see that very often these settlements are the product of long-term exclusion processes, housing exclusion of Roma families for integrated part of cities because of the privatization of social housing, urban regeneration process, the changes of labor markets from the beginning of 90s. So, for example, in Hungary, we can see that while in the beginning of 90s, the urban Roma population exceeded the rural one. Now it's just the other way around. So there were very significant migration process, and not as deliberate migration process from urban centers to rural areas. So it practically meant crowding out poor Roma families from cities. And yes, recently we did several researches in Roma settlements, And we also investigated the will of people to move out from the settlement. And we could find that many people do not move out because they do not feel safe, that they can find safe and long-term housing options outside the settlement. So they don't want to lose their safe but bad housing for better but uncertain housing options. So the main challenge, I think, for desegregation policy is to provide safe and long-term solutions. And in the field of housing, it's a particular crucial challenge because in these countries, the social housing is scarce and actually they are really sometimes municipalities exclude the most vulnerable people from getting access to social housing. So we think that first social housing provision has to be increased, and while EU funds are available for these purposes, we can see that very few programs are implemented in this field. So that's why that private renters are gaining more importance actually, generally to house poor people and also Roma people. So for social housing, we could find good programs, some. One of the maybe the most well-known is the Spanish IRIS program, where they use the scattered social housing to relocate people from informal settlement. And this is a very long-term program, which I think it's a very crucial feature of these kind of programs, that they should work with people on the long term. And in this program, families could choose location in the city, and they also were prepared before the move, and they could negotiate where they move, and they receive social support during the process and after they were relocated. In Czechia, we can find a good example how to use private rentals for desegregation measures. NGOs implement such programs with the help of the rent subsidy, which is provided by the central government. And they move Roma families from segregated into the integrated part of the cities. And there are two important aspects of these programs that should be really emphasized: that the rent subsidy is sufficient to rent a normal flat on the market in the integrated part of the settlement, and the other thing that there is no time limit to get access to this subsidy for the families. And the other aspect is that NGOs still have to cooperate with the municipalities, and this is very important because otherwise they can politically block the program. So really the successful programs are those when the NGOs can really gain the support of the municipalities. The other countries, let's say in Hungary and also Slovakia, they don't get this rent subsidy for private rental apartments, but there are programs, the so-called social rental agency programs, where they use private rental market to provide affordable housing for vulnerable people, also for Romas. And that's why social rental agencies are gaining more and more importance, and they are using these agencies are using the private rentals, and they are mediating between the families and the landlords to act against the housing discrimination, which are very widespread in the private rental market. In Slovakia, we could even see that that some social bank plans to establish a social rental agency working together with an NGO to provide social support for the families. We also see, okay, I have 1 minute. Oh, no minute.
Okay, minus
Okay,
2 minutes.
okay. Oh, sorry. So another important issue that not only housing should be in the focus of this program, but also employment programs. That is especially important because of the weakness of the welfare system of these countries. And we could find some very good examples. Also, this one of Slovakian NGO PIM provides an integrated package with housing support and employment support, also working together with companies to place Roma people into employment. And one more thing.
Esther, maybe
Yeah,
excuse me.
I just
Maybe
raised.
I will need to stop you here.
Okay.
We have enough time. Thank you very much for this very interesting overview of different approaches in different countries. I have already a few questions, but please let me give the floor to Bojan, and I apologize that I missed the order that was originally agreed. Bojan, please.
Thank you, Marek. I like very much what Esther presented. Unfortunately, in my country, most of these advanced options are yet not present and not available. So I would just outline where the problems come from. There are many young people from in Roma communities who indeed want to move from these places. In Bulgaria, unlike some other countries in Central and Eastern Europe, there are some very big Roma neighborhoods uh, with generally poor living conditions. We could call them Roma slums. So the reality is that they were growing for a long period of time, but now they have reached mostly their natural limits. So there is no more space. So it gets congested. It gets very packed. It's even suffocating to live in some of those places. So there are young people who indeed want to leave, but because we don't have such policies that would support them, there are no housing subsidies in Bulgaria. There are no housing benefits. It's a zero, apart from some in the social, for the public social housing. So, and then prices are getting up, driven by many factors. Most of them are pan-European or even global, so it's very expensive. And they cannot leave. They have to be, I would like to see in Bulgaria some of those programs that Esther mentioned implemented, but they are not available yet. The other the other most unfortunate way in which segregation keeps increasing is that in the periphery of many Roma settlements, there are lots of newcomers, also poor Roma coming, let's say, from villages, from smaller settlements, from places where there are no jobs. So it's these are really informal parts of the Roma settlements, of the Roma neighborhoods, with very poor housing conditions, and some of them were growing for a long time. And I think for these kind of places, public social housing is a very good option, especially if it's well built, if it's in good locations from where there is access to services and to jobs. But this also, the public housing stock has been diminishing for a very long period, and now it's negligible. It's in municipal ownership. Municipalities were trying to build some with EU money primarily, and then they faced this opposition that Marek, you also mentioned. In some big cities, there were protests against relocating Roma to other neighborhoods, and even some municipalities had to cancel it. Of course, one could argue that the reason is that traditional municipal social housing is too concentrated, too visible. And this is indeed the case. I think social rental intermediaries, cooperatives who rent dispersed housing could provide kind of a solution to this. But there is even more to it, because many Roma in interviews that we carry in Roma neighborhoods, they do complain that the environment is sometimes generally not accepting and hostile. So to wrap up, because you asked us what needs to be done, um, I should mention one more, another type of policies which is very popular globally in the global south and on the Balkans, promoted by the World Bank, inspired by the idea of the economist De Soto, that it's about legalization, it's about bringing those neighborhoods into urban regulations, and this was done on a massive scale on the Balkans, more in Albania and in North Macedonia, where they say it worked well. Even in Roma neighborhoods, there are some articles describing the process. In Bulgaria, it's not so widespread, but it's supported by, I should say, by Roma activists and NGOs, and it was done in some places with American funding, and the result was not bad. It was done in smaller communities where it can be done. So this trend will continue. It's a very powerful trend and supported by very powerful players, and has it's very much more popular globally than the policies of the EU. So to wrap up, I believe several principles should be observed in the segregation. I would summarize what Esther said in this way, that you should open opportunities. You should provide means for people to choose to leave these neighborhoods when they want. You shouldn't implement policies that try to chase them away from the neighborhoods, because there were such trends. For example, somebody claiming that you shouldn't invest in repairing a sewage pipeline, which emits very bad smell, in a neighborhood which is deprived with a lot of Roma, but many houses are completely legal. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a sewage network there. So this is not fair, in my view, saying that don't invest there, EU money or public money, because this place is segregated, or not giving access to programs for improving their own houses, like the energy efficiency, or to credit lines, again, publicly supported, again, claiming that you see it's a segregated place, so we shouldn't invest there. I think these neighborhoods should be improved, and every effort should be done, because better infrastructure and better accessibility, it improves the chances of people moving around. Anyway, it does not contradict the other idea, and then it helps people to establish social networks that go beyond their neighborhoods in other fields of life, like jobs, like education, services. And at the end of the day, this is how we have to look at the segregation, not in numerical terms, which is the typical approach, but looking on the broader social context. And then we'll see that there are a lot of options. That's from me as introduction.
Thank you, Bojan. Bogdan is from Romania, where a new law concerning informal Roma settlements has been adopted. Can you share your experience from this new policy, and how the desegregation or segregation issue has been addressed there?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Esther. Thank you, Bojan, for your presentation. Concerning the general framework of the public housing, social housing, our country is similar. So desegregation by social housing, it's very difficult. could be used, these tools, public tools, individual, but is not a general solution for desegregation of informal settlements. After a year and year of research, the information, the news about Romania, the good news about Romania, finally, it's we have a law in the field of informal settlements. So in 2019, from 2019, we have a law dedicated to informal settlements, the law 151, who supplement the law urban and territorial planning. And since 2020, the government also implemented the methodological technical norms for applying the law. So in terms of legislation, it's a coherence. It was a very good agreement between all the party members of the parliaments, and even the government was very, very involved in order to build and to promote these technical norms. I mentioned that in Romania we talk about 200,000 people who live in informal settlements. It's a census research made 5 years ago by the Ministry of Regional Development. So it's a very important phenomenon who ask also the very important political and technical measure, the appropriated programs, not only in terms of planning and land use, but also social education, health, etc. I mentioned that this legislation it was promoted very fastly by the member of parliaments, but a lot of NGOs, also the NGOs, MKBT, Make Better NGOs, of which I am a member, and many other NGOs have make a lot of advocacy and mobilize the member in order to promote this law. So I think it was a very important moment. And after that, we have the framework, legal framework to make action. The law define informal settlements. It's a lot of local authorities, the specialists, the people from administration, a different level, who never know exactly what is an informal settlement. It's generally, before we talk, I don't know, the mahala, the poor area, the Roma village, etc., etc. But informal settlement is not only a poor, vulnerable community. It's a lot of rules concerning the planning, the documents concerning the property of the lands, etc., etc. So in this legislation, we organize all this information in a coherence in order to be possible to be applied. So we the law defined the informal settlements, set up the responsibility of the local, county level and government public authorities, set the deadline for different activities and measure, describe alternative intervention solution, offer the information concerning the procedure and community involvement and the process of the participatory planning and protection of inhabitants. We was very very careful of these topics in order to stop some radical measures concerning some communities, and maybe some bad example, punctual but bad example, when from today, from one day to other, the community was erased because it was in the pre-electoral period, and the majority asked to make proper the mayor in the city. So sometimes the electoral period is very difficult for the poor people and for the informal settlements. So in this legislation, and after research and a lot of discussion with the competent people from the local local level, county level, and also the government, we organize a hierarchy of action. And in this action of the public servant and the public authorities, the most important responsibility, the most important role in identifying, improving the living condition of inhabitants of these communities is the local authorities. If the mayor and the services of the city hall is not sensitive, is not close for these problematics, is not close to legislation, is not close. They don't look for to do solution. Of course, we spend the times, and the times is not favorable for resolving the informality. I work in informal settlement from until 2007. And I remember in Târgu Mureș is the first informal settlement when I work, Maros-Vásárhely for Esther, and I 10 years after my first visit in this community, the changes was very, very important. The former poor shelter, not houses, shelters in plastic and wood, 10 years later was the same surface, but in the concrete. Very difficult to organize, to build planning, to organize healthy and safety for fire, this type of community. Individual maybe is better, those inside of this new shelter. But actually the difficulty sometimes it's better in this time. For that, I think we work and we organize. We was close to the local authorities in order to promote inform the inhabitants about the provision of the law and pushing the local authorities to initiate process of consultation and participatory planning in order to identify intervention solution adapted to the specific of informal settlements and the need of communities. Because in this legislation, the regulation provide relocation or improving solution in place. And for each one, it's all the times alternative and individual solution in order to protect, in order to promote participatory, in order to ask the opinion and to consultate the resident, in order to not just relocate and to say I solved the situation, but just to understand exactly what is the individual solution. I would like to.
Do you think that this relocation is realistic? Often because Bojan already mentioned the backlash that usually appears when there is such an effort or plan.
It's impossible, in my opinion. I agree with Bojan to talk about relocation as a solution. Generally, it's impossible. But for the future, in our legislation, we talk also for the future. The rules is to stop sprawl of informal settlements, and for the new generation, for the new families, for the young people who want to build a house, the future is involvement of the local authorities to offer the solution in the public social housing, or to build a new house. We have a legislation concerning the young married, and some localities could offer the plot of lands in order to build a house, and this is the solution. And I would like to say in Romania now, after the legislation, the technical norms, we have the first project for informal settlements in the city of Reșița, and in practice. And this we check, if you want, how is the solution. And of course, desegregation is one of the most word of this project. And so to go directly to the solution, of course, I think generally for the moment it's a regeneration in place, because sometimes it's some entire village, 100 and 1,000 people who are very, very far from the other cities. It's impossible to say I would like to make the desegregation, but how? Because it's very difficult. So I think desegregation must be the guiding principle of the intervention, but solution must result from the communication, participatory planning, and analyzing each community's member option. Again, Reshica.
Excuse me, Bogdan, I have to stop you here because we have 7 minutes left. We haven't received any questions yet. We have one comment from Niho Beno from Bulgaria, but I would have 2 questions, mainly, I mean, to all of you. We speak a lot about like social rental agency, etc. Do you think that all those innovative measures can be realistically done, and then is it meaningful to speak about them if we do not have in many countries effective social housing benefits? So can anyone who is without resources benefit from those innovations, or it's impossible? Or what are the limits of those without having real support on the demand side in housing?
If I can have a short answer, in Romania, social housing has a very bad image, and the state spent not too much legislation, money, encouragement for the local authorities to build social housing. So social housing is very limited solution, and I think is not so. It could be. It was a solution of desegregation, social mobility for a generation 40 years ago. But in this economic, ideological, political moment in Romania, social housing is not a political will interest subject.
Thank you. 6 minutes, so you can have like 2 minutes per answer.
Okay, so can I answer that? I think that in some we can see good examples when they use. Of course, in Hungary now we don't have housing allowance, central housing allowance, but we used to have, but it was very small amount really, so it was not really sufficient. But you can see that like small scale program can be run on this base, and it can help people who are not the most vulnerable. But together with, if you develop some integrated programs, so you also have employment programs, employment support with this accompanying this housing support activities, then it can work. But on the system level, it cannot work, I think. And you cannot really base a desegregation program on private rental without a sufficient housing allowance or rent subsidy program. So that's for sure, yes. And we can also see, as Bogdan also mentioned, that in cities with very high rent, it's really not a solution. So it's a big problem. Actually, we wanted to, one of the city wanted, or not we, but one of our partner wanted to implement such a program, but there was no available flat at all, not even affordable. So it's where the labor market is very good, you face with this difficulty that the rents are very high.
We have one comment from Laura Palanchikova, who says that, my understanding of this is that it's probably very important not only to plan and implement good interventions addressing housing, but also work on the policy image, how she called it, and this is maybe another other area of intervention. Myself, I have an experience from one research in Slovakia that only village that engaged into desegregation housing policy for Roma, it ended bad because the mayor who was leading this intervention lost the next elections, and she was never re-elected. So the question is how to convince political leaders to engage into such risky adventures. On the other hand, if it has to have some effect, probably there is a need of investing into this. Okay, can you share any experience from working with the public opinion together with intervening in the housing itself? I remember that, for example, the IRIS initiative in Madrid that Esther mentioned was relocating people from asylum seekers or migrants, but at the same time they were supporting them to participate in community activities that probably somehow help to address or to mitigate those risks. Do you have any other experience from such supportive actions?
We had one, and some years ago, with one desegregation program. It was a pilot program, and a smaller town in southern Hungary, and really the mayor was very supportive for the program. And I think one of the clues is that it was not, it was in a scattered way, and not, it was not a big segregate that they eradicated. So, but I really think that some more know-how should be transferred to local level, how to implement good communication program. And I think there are two levels of this communication. One is a more general to the majority of the local people, and the other is that to the people who are really affected by the relocation, who live there, and they have many times they have very unrealistic, unrealistic. They're afraid of Roma people, or even homeless people when they have homeless programs. So the communication with them and the preparedness of them to explain the whole process to them, what they can do if they see any problem, who they can turn to. These are very, very important, I think. But we have to say that we see that some political parties, locally or not even local political parties, just generate this kind of protests and fears of just increase the fears of the people, unrealistic fears of the people. So I think good communication tools should be provided for the local stakeholders when they implement these kind of programs.
Thank you. It has popped up on me that we are ending in 10 seconds. So it was super fast again, and I would like to thank.
Time of 5 minutes.
We have extra time, 5 minutes.
It says on the screen.
Okay. I see extra 5 minutes there. Okay, that's interesting, but it's good. I wanted to ask you one other thing, because my experience, or it is rather impression. I don't have really evidence, but my experience from many housing programs focusing Roma, in particular in Slovakia, but also partially in Czechia. But there, I think that we have found some measures which can mitigate this. So I think that often a big limitation of both success and political feasibility is that those interventions focus on large groups of people. So, for example, when speaking about a rural Roma settlement and we speak about desegregation, it's always reduced to this message: we are going to move 600 Roma from the settlement into the village, and maybe this individual humanistic perspective, also assessing people's possibilities and also the target community's capacity to integrate new people, it's often omitted. So it's either doing nothing or relocating 600 people. And my sense is that maybe if we apply more individualized approach, this can be more successful, let's say. Do you have any experiences from such interventions that instead of moving big masses of people, help individuals to climb the individual ladder to get to a better place, etc.? Would this work? Maybe Bogdan, please.
I have a bad example. I have a bad example. 10 years ago was after a rain, hard rain. It was informal settlements who was very touched by that. and local authorities and government organize, I don't know, emergency measure, and they take the people from these informal settlements close to the river and go to the hill, and they built 15 houses in the line, 2 rooms each one, no road, no water, no nothing, 2 kilometers for the village. So sometimes it's very important to organize that. So sometimes if the measure is very fast, could be very, very, very bad. And again, Esther and Boyan said it's important the dimension of the communities. It's important to promote maybe better example with the small communities, integration, accompanying the measure social housing, health, etc. And after that, little by little, I think idea of desegregation and the real measure, who sometimes for the public servant, for the local authorities, the mayor, etc., desegregation, it's a foreign language, so could be the measure who could be managed by the local level with county level and governmental level coordination, methodological information, good practice, etc.
I think, Marek, that when it comes to this kind of emergency communication, and when we talk communication strategy, it's already a failed project. I think as much as, and it in itself, this very message that you need communication and the use of these words is very stigmatizing for those that are going to be moved. So in each case, you have to use as much as possible the natural channels for communication, that the way that people interact in their daily lives, and support them into this. And this is the only way to build social networks where you can feel at home. So I'm against these campaigns. I was in favor, but it has always been a failure. So I think we don't have to use these tools, but rely on. They are helpless against the social networks that we have today. Absolutely helpless, and they even instigate. So you have to act in a natural way, and that's very difficult. How to make somebody feel okay in a new community, how to get to know your neighbors. These are very difficult things, and they are not about mass communication.
Mhm.